All right, everyone, we have to talk about the Coastguard now because Joe Biden has called for the mobilization of up to 3,000 members of the U.S. Coast Guard to take part in Atlantic Resolve and to rotate around in Europe. Now, this is not the first time that we have increased our forces there. There are now over 100,000 U.S. forces in Eastern Europe, actually, a considerably higher number than I think really there needs to be. The European nations all have their own militaries. They do exist, believe it or not, although some of them have grown decadent and really they don't have a whole lot of heavy equipment. Like I think the Netherlands here has 4 tanks in the whole nation. That is insufficient to guard a land area the size of the Netherlands, and considering the amount of wealth and the output of crops and so forth in this country and the huge banking sector, you might want to beef it up a little bit. It might be a good idea. The very least, reintroduce the concept of an armed population, because right now, if the Russians were to invade, people would be fighting them with pneumatic rifles and knives. They would not last very long. I'm scratching my head on this one, though, because we've already got a large number of troops in Europe to, dissuade Russia from any funny stuff in NATO countries. Okay, that makes sense to maintain a posturing position. I don't know that we need 100,000 troops to accomplish that. I think that simply having 10,000 controlling some missile systems would probably suffice, because again, Europe does have an enormous amount of potential manpower, although a lot of those people would refuse to fight, I think, if fighting began. Again, when you haven't been used to an internal war in a good long time, sometimes you forget about the necessity of self-defense. That's why people in comfy liberal neighborhoods with gates and their own private security are most likely to be anti-gun for a reason, for example, in the United States. What the hell is between 450 and 3,000 Coast Guard members really going to add to our capabilities in Europe? Biden says, well, I've determined that it's necessary to buff up our forces. Oh, okay, so then Coast Guard units not currently attached to naval operations and individuals therein which are not considered to be particularly important stateside can now be called up and mobilized. What are they going to accomplish? You're not telling us what they're going to be used for. In fact, it's rather open-ended. We see this a lot now. For once, Biden is doing something that's constitutional. As commander-in-chief, asterisk administration proportion of that aside, he is capable of doing this. He's capable of commanding the Secretary of State and so forth to get things mustered up, get people retrained, and send them abroad. Why, though? Russia has made no effective overture whatsoever toward showing any inclination to poke the bear and attack NATO. That would not be wise. NATO has grown, actually. Finland's now in NATO. Sweden's about to join, for what little that's worth. I think the Finns would be more effective in battle. If you look at the history of the Winter War, you'll probably understand why. Sweden, meanwhile, okay, you had your day. Back in the 1700s. NATO is enormous. Russia doesn't even have enough nukes to crush all of NATO. There'd still be hundreds of millions of people left alive that were capable of fighting back, and Russia would be obliterated too. So I don't know what's accomplished in the end, other than making the southern hemisphere the seat of the world. You'd see the rise of Argentina and Australia as major world powers. Australia would become the new Britain at that point. They would rebuild. Britain would effectively be annihilated. Nuclear war works for nobody. What are these troops going to do? What's the point? If you were mobilizing 30,000 men, okay, well then that's a significant increase in forces, and for whatever purpose you intend them to be used for, the purpose has been furthered considerably. But as little as 450 people, so enough to staff a couple of small ships, and that's literally it. What purpose? I guess that they're the ones that are going to have to supply the cocaine to the front lines. They're going to have to take a little naval group and sail back and forth between Colombia and Europe in order to supply more to the population, because they keep raiding the shipping tanks and finding all the coke that we're trying to pile in. And you know that that's CIA aided, of course. The Coast Guard works directly with them, so maybe that's what they're aiming for. I just don't understand at this point. The entirety, I support the Western world. And I support NATO's existence. I don't have a problem with that. And I support the concept of democracy. We're using that as a loose term because it's become misused more than used properly of late over older world authoritarian systems. Support that. But I don't understand the military posturing of the West right now. It doesn't make sense. And when things start not to make sense, it can be very ominous. the current U.S. troop movements that I see aren't helpful. We're going to spend now even more money fielding potentially up to 3,000 additional individuals in a field of combat that we're not directly associated with anyway. We're simply piling money and weapons into a third world nation to fight off the Russians, effectively as a proxy war, but we're not directly involved. These troops, these men are Coast Guard. We're not even talking about a full-on naval deployment. We're talking about effectively an auxiliary force normally known to be used for guarding our own waters. By the way, is this taking any people away from the Gulf of Mexico or Southern California and trying to stop drug shipments down there? Like all the Coke submarines that are built in South America? Is this going to hamper their capabilities? Well, it's just more people that can't be deployed domestically for a good purpose. If you were going to mobilize these troops, what you should do is mobilize them to guard our own maritime borders, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, Texas and Florida and so forth. That's what they should be mobilized to do, because clearly we have a border problem. And it's no longer just the land border, it's also aquatic in nature. There are pirates and smugglers and traffickers and all manner of shit in the Caribbean. Yeah, there's still pirates of the Caribbean. These days they use speedboats. Wouldn't it be better to guard our own shores? It's just like sending all the money to Ukraine when we could have completed the Bollard Wall across the entire southern U.S. border by now if we had just funded it more. If Congress hadn't dragged its heels and the largesse of the central government had been utilized to simply build the fucking wall, we would no longer have nearly as much of a border crisis. We could make 2 fucking walls, back to back, side by side, for the same cost that we've propped up Ukraine anyway. Why not do that? Have them like 10 yards apart or something. Hell, then throw in a 12-foot chain link fence topped with electrical wire too, for good measure. Hell, put landmines in there. Who fucking cares? It doesn't matter, because the world has gone completely apeshit at this point. We're effectively edging towards a nuclear war. It doesn't really even matter if we do screwy shit. At least on the southern border, we'd be doing some measure of good, defending our own country. Europe is already well defended enough. The Germans are rearming. The Polish are rearming. The French are rearming. Various other countries are rearming. Dude, Europe is capable of standing for itself, and because of NATO membership on its own, Russia's not going to attack them. Not unless it's suicidal. That means nuclear war. They'd be doing effectively what we're doing, light version right now, which is poking the goddamn bear. And I just don't see what 3,000 additional Coast Guard members are going to do about it. What the fuck is the point? What are they even going to be doing? What's the mission statement? Are we going to get an update and hear what they're exactly going to Europe for? Probably not. That's about all. Peace out.